Hello everyone, and welcome to the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development event, looking at the sustainable management of forests, how to seek a balance through EU policies. I'm your moderator for today. My name is Joanne O'Hara. I'm a consultant, a forest policy advisor, and I'm formerly the Chief Forester for Scotland. So I take great interest in this discussion today, and there's a lot to get through. So I'm particularly keen to welcome today your hosts for the day, who are the co-chairs of the Working Group on Sustainable Forest Management of the EP Intergroup. And they are MEPs Jutta Gutteland, Elsi Katainen, and Simone Schmidt-Bauer, and we will be hearing from them during the day. Over the course of the next couple of hours, we will have some opening remarks from our hosts, 2 short videos, a keynote address from Dr. Georg Winkel, a panel discussion, followed by reactions from politicians, and you will have a chance to question the panelists and politicians in an audience Q&A at the end. And finally, we'll have some closing remarks from our co-host, MEP Simone Schmidt-Bauer, to close the conference at 3 p.m. Just a couple of technical points. The Twitter, if you're going to go onto Twitter, please tag the European Parliament Intergroup account, which is on your programme. The event is being recorded, and the recording and PowerPoint will be available tomorrow on the website. Now, we do want this to be a discussion and as interactive as possible, so I would like to invite participants to send us your questions during the event. For that, you can use the Q&A box of the platform. Just use the All Panelists option when you ask your question. And within your question, please say who you would like to address your question to. And that will make the discussion flow a bit more easier and will make my job a bit more easy to do. So that should be all the technical introductions done. So keen to get underway now. So first of all, I would like to introduce MEP Elsi Katainen to open the event, and she will be followed by MEP Jutta Gutteland. Thank you very much, Elsi. Over to you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you participating today on this event and discussing this important topic. Sustainable forest management is the cornerstone of European environmental, economical, and social well-being. I see that EU's forests are a key element to reach the Green Deal objectives. It must be remembered in the implementation that Green Deal is a growth plan which should give more than it takes, as Ursula von der Leyen has stated. When talking about forests, we should always have a long-term vision and bottom-up approach, as the life cycle of the tree is always dozens of years, and best knowledge of each forest is at the local level. Europe's forests are very diverse. In Finland, 75% of the land is covered by forests. On the other hand, we have countries like Netherlands with 11% of forest coverage. There are serious biogeographic differences as well as various forest management approaches, which are all needed. It is inevitable that one size doesn't fit all, and I hope Commissioners Timmermans and Sinkevicius will still adapt when we are heading towards Fit for 55 trilogues on different legislations. Parliament is currently drafting the report on new EU forest strategy. This is a good moment to underline these things. Commission didn't listen to co-legislators in the new strategy before publishing it last summer. Fortunately, in the implementation of the strategy, the Parliament and the Member States have a decisive say on each initiative. I welcome that EU takes a stronger role on monitoring of forests, but the best practices of Member States should be taken into account. European Commission should also respect Member States' competence and not build new definitions on the forest management, like closer to nature forestry. This work should be done under Forest Europe platform, where Commission can, of course, participate. We see also that in the update of Renewable Energy Directive and the Deforestation Regulation, Commission has proposed several new unclear definitions and conditionalities on forest management. I think here we need policy coherence and rethinking what is the actual target of these laws. EU should focus on tackling deforestation, which is crucial in tackling climate change, but not try to set the definition and rules on forest management globally by introducing a new forest degradation definitions. European forest owners should be given a stronger voice in the development of forestry-related policies, and their good practices should be made more visible. Today's online event aims at bringing together various speakers from member states, European regions, and representatives of economic and social parties to exchange about the future of the sustainable forest management concept and practices. I wish you all a constructive and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Katainen. So we have a slight issue with your co-chair who has been held up in another meeting. So already we have a dynamic agenda developing here. So what I'm going to do, if that's okay, Ms. Mellier, is I'm going to come straight to your intervention. So I would like now to introduce Isabelle Mellier, who is chair of the Working Party on Forestry, who's speaking on behalf of the French presidency. So Ms. Mellier, across to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Honourable members of the European Parliament, dear panelists and dear participants, I am very honoured as chair of the Council Working Party on Forestry under the French presidency to participate to this event today. Indeed, sustainable management is at the very heart of public forest policies conducted by member states in the EU. The thematic question for this event is how to seek a balance through EU policies. Indeed, many different texts adopted, under discussion or announced at European level deal directly or indirectly with subjects linked to forests. I will only list some of them: the taxonomy regulation, the proposed revision of the Renewable Energy Directive, the proposed regulation on deforestation and forest degradation-free products, the revision of the LULUCF regulation, the announced legislative proposal on the certification of carbon removal and on EU forest observatory reporting and data collection, or the announced legally binding instrument for ecosystem restoration. More could be cited. As you know, the Commission has published last July its new EU forest strategy for 2030. And as a contribution to today's debate on how to seek a balanced approach to EU policies, I would like to underline some of the key messages from the Council conclusion adopted last November regarding this new EU forest strategy. In its conclusion, the Council recognized the leading role of Forest Europe ministerial process in developing dialogue principles, criteria, indicators, and definitions related to the multifunctional role of forests and their sustainable management. And it recalled the shared vision for European forests set out in the Bratislava Ministerial Declaration, "The future we want, the forests we need." The Council also recognized that sustainable forest management, as defined by Forest Europe following the forest principle, is a dynamic and evolving concept, providing a framework for balancing the provision and enhancement of ecological, economic, and social services of forest and forest ecosystems to contribute to the three dimensions of sustainable development and thus promoting the multiple functions of forests. The Council stressed the importance of SFM as a nature-based solution catering multiple goals for the maintenance and appropriate enhancement of forest resource and their contribution to multiple services like carbon, resilience of forest ecosystem, forest protective function, economic functions of forest. The Council insisted that a comprehensive framework for the sector is needed, taking into account all three dimensions of sustainability in a balanced and holistic way. In this regard, the Council highlighted the need to strengthen the socio-economic goals of the strategy. The Council also reiterated the need for coherence between the different EU forest-related policies, goals and instruments directly or indirectly affecting forests. This need to address increasing fragmentation of EU forest-related policies and improve their coordination and coherence had already been assessed in previous Council conclusion in November 2020. The Council also stressed that a one-size-fits-all approach to forests in the EU may prove counterproductive and emphasized the need to recognize, respect and maintain the diversity and specificities of, among others, forests, silvicultural practices, ownership, and also diversity among member states and regions, including areas with natural constraints and overseas regions. The Council stressed the importance of member states' competence on forest issues and in this regard reiterated there also the statements already made in Council conclusion of November 2020. Regarding the elaboration of the strategy, member states also regretted that the new EU forest strategy was not developed together with the member states and stakeholders and expressed its willingness and readiness to cooperate with the Commission in working together on implementing the new forest strategy in an integrated manner. Regarding the initiative for a legislative proposal for a forest observation, reporting and data collection framework, including member states' strategic plan for forest, the Council asked for clarification on its added value since much is already done by member states on this subject and recalled the need to acknowledge the cost effectiveness of such plans and to avoid duplication and additional administrative burden. Regarding governance, the Council agreed to the need for an inclusive approach and good coordination between EU forest relevant bodies. It also recommended that the existing Standing Forest Committee remain the main forum for member states' representatives and the Commission to discuss and advise on forest-related topics at EU level. The Council also encouraged the full involvement of relevant stakeholders, including forest owners and managers, in the consultation, preparing the implementation, and in the strategy implementation itself, and called for a constructive dialogue and collaborative work between the Commission, member states, and the relevant stakeholders and civil society. The Council also invited the EU and the member states to continue to play a leading role in promoting sustainable forest management and halting deforestation at global level in various international fora, such as the United Nations Forum on Forest that will take place in a few days, for example. These are part of the key messages addressed by the Council that can contribute to this balanced approach through EU policies, and I hope that these inputs regarding the importance of the promotion of sustainable forest management, the recognition of multifunctionality of forest and the need for a balanced approach between the three pillars of sustainable development, the need for coherence among the EU policy, the counterproductive of a one-size-fits-all approach due to the diversity of forest, the need to assess added value and avoid duplication, the need for consultation with all parties will be interesting inputs for your discussion today. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mallier. What an amazing summary of the complexity of things that we're facing here. So thank you very much for that. And I think we're going to be hearing from your successor with the Working Party later on in the day. So thanks very much for that. And I'm pleased to say now that we're managed to be joined by Ms. Guteland. I would like to now pass over to the co-host, Jutta Guteland, to add to her welcome in this opening session. Thank you, Jutta Guteland.
Thank you, Jo, and also thank you to Elsie, who I think was starting the conversation and saying welcome. I had some delayed meeting and then some also connection problem, but I'm really sorry about that. And I'm very happy to see you all joining this webinar, and also with this very timely topic. And I would like to say thank you to all of you joining this lunch discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words about the many initiatives and regulations that is or directives that are ahead of us, and also I would like to comment on the forest strategy, of course. I think it is indeed very timely to talk about the forest and its role in the Green Deal. We have both with the forest strategy, with LULUCF, with RED, and also with the work on the deforestation, many important things ahead of us that will have impact both on climate, biodiversity, and for the forests. And in this capacity, I will work as a member and really try to do my very best together with all colleagues to make sure that we have a good policy mix here that will indeed help both the forest to be a tool for stopping the global heating, and also make sure that we have a very good policy for the biodiversity. And at the same time, we need to also make sure that we use the forest not only as a sink and the help to capture the CO2, but also as a tool in the more circular economy that we have ahead of us and that we need to work towards. And I'm saying that because I myself come from Sweden, a very forest-rich country, and I see that it is possible to make sure that the forest is growing and growing together with management of the forest. But you have to do it in a good balance, and you have to make sure that it is sustainable in the way you use the forest. And of course, I wish I would have been able to listen to Elsie and my colleague and hear the intervention there. But I can give you my thought on this. When it comes to the forest strategy, I think one has to both encourage that we have a forest strategy together. We have a situation that is severe and very negative for biodiversity. We have also a situation where we have not been able to have more and more forest in Europe over the latest decade. So we are in a situation where Europe needs to turn that around, and we need to make sure that we plant more trees, that we have a better, more sustainable forest management in the European Union, that we preserve the biodiversity and also increases it. So this is very good indeed. In the same time, we cannot have a situation where the forest strategy is being negative towards systems who actually provides that. And there I will use my Swedish hat a bit. And I would like to say that if the forest strategy is too much into the nitty-gritty and not using market-based tools that's actually working, it could harm the possibility to substitute fossil fuels and use instead the forest. And we would like to see the climate be benefited by having more products in wood instead of plastics. And we would like to see in the renovation wave in Europe that we use more forest instead of and tools from the forest instead of using the plastics. So this is something we need the balance there, because if we don't allow that countries who actually have a very sustainable way managing the forest, then we will have less use of it when we are substitute to the fossil fuels. And I will also, and this is my last remark here in the introduction, because I see Joe gets nervous. I would also like to mention that of course, LULUCF is also extremely important. I was the rapporteur for the climate law. So for me, of course, I support that we should have higher ambition when it comes to the targets for 2030. And we should also, of course, use the sink. But I am worried, and I would like to say that in this forum, that the Commission likes too much to use the coal sink instead of reduction in problematic sectors. And that could harm the target, because if we get into a situation where we believe that the forest could compensate for reductions we don't have the energy to do, then we are in a very vulnerable, fragile situation. Forest can get fire, it can go fire, and we can also have problems with insects. And we also know that all the countries are not there. And I also need to say that it's not sustainable that some countries has to bear a very big part of this. I see at the Nordic countries that they are actually responsible for a very high amount of this sink. And I don't think that's sustainable. And last but not least, the forest cannot compensate for what's not done in the agriculture sector. So we need to separate the targets here. This is something that I think my group will insist on a lot in the debates in the parliament. I would like to speak much longer, but I know that I would like to listen too, so I will listen now. And thank you everyone for being here to this very interesting and timely discussion.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. So I think that sets us up really nicely for the rest of the conversation that we're going to have today. So this next, now we've got through that introductory session, we're now going to have some presentations. We have 2 videos and a keynote. So we're going to start off with a video from Eustafor representing the state forest managers, who have put this together, Sustainable Management 101, which gives an overview of what sustainable forest management is all about. And this is a great wee video, so enjoy.
Forests cover 35% of Europe and are vital for both humans and the planet. Sustainable forest management is an essential approach used throughout Europe to ensure the vitality and durability of forests. It provides solutions for making forests more resilient and adapt to climate change, while contributing to mitigation through carbon sequestration, carbon storage, and substitution for fossil-based raw materials. Actively managed forests provide a home for biodiversity. Where needed, forest managers support species and habitats with additional protection and restoration measures. The role of forests in water and nutrient cycles, air purification, and soil protection is also supported. Sustainable forest management includes harvesting, not only to supply wood for houses, furniture, and many other products, but also to provide space and light to other growing trees, control pests and diseases, remove the risk of falling trees, and open up spaces for wildlife. Forest regeneration is secured by supporting natural regeneration and planting millions of seedlings each year. Forest managers ensure harvests never exceed the natural growth of forests. Over the last 30 years, the volume of wood in European forests has increased by 50%. Besides wood, actively managed forests boost the rural economy by offering a multitude of renewable products, and respond to the demands of society by providing beautiful landscapes and recreational areas for millions of people to enjoy. Today's sustainable forest management will secure the potential of forests to fulfill their ecological, economic, social, and cultural functions for generations to come.
Thanks very much for that. Oh. Thanks very much for that. So for any of you in the audience who weren't sure about what sustainable forest management is, now you know. There's not going to be a quiz at the end, so you're okay though. Right, so after that video, I'd now like to introduce Dr. Georg Winkel, who is Professor and Chair of the Forest Institute. I better get this right, actually. He's Professor and Chair of Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Group at Wageningen University and Research. So over to you, Georg. And just before you start, I'd just like to warn participants, unfortunately, Dr. Winkel's going to have to leave, so he won't be here for the Q&A. So if you just make sure you pay attention, but sadly, he won't be able to take questions afterwards. So thanks, Georg. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jo, for the nice introduction. Nice to see you again, by the way. Honorable members of the European Parliament, dear participants, dear panelists, it's a big pleasure for me to give this keynote speech, which I called Governing European Forests for Multiple Ecosystem Services, Challenges and Policy Responses. I would like to highlight that what I'm going to present is shared work. It's based on a policy paper that we developed in 2 European projects, the CINCIA project, headed by the European Forest Institute, my former colleague Marko Lovric, and the Nobel project headed by the University, Boco University in Vienna, led by Harald Wacek. We developed a policy paper with a very similar name than the title of my presentation. Here you can see the authors and also where you can access the paper. And there's a lot more in this than what I'm now going to present. One of the, oops, what's going to happen here? I hope you can see my presentation, because I get some alarming. Okay. A first thing we did is from the perspective of EU policy making for a governing multiple forest ecosystem service, we identified 6 challenges that I would like to shortly introduce to you. An insufficient alignment of forest ecosystem services provision and demand. I come back to this on my next slides. A political polarization relating to forests. The regulatory framework that is seen as inhibiting ecosystem services innovations, as I won't come back to that. This is coming out of a survey that I'm going to introduce later. We did with forest owners and forest managers, where the regulatory framework and policymakers were seen and described from their perspective as one of the most inhibiting factors for innovations with forest ecosystem services, for new ideas to practice forest management. There's still a lack of information on ecosystem service provision and specifically demand, what is actually demanded by society. There's climate change adaptation, which is a bit of a mega challenge for forestry, affecting currently European forests to different degrees. And there's finally, and this has been stressed already by previous speakers, a huge diversity of forest situations in Europe, just illustrated here by a few pictures of forest management situations across the continent. All of these challenges are challenges, but also holds opportunities. I would now like to illustrate 2 of them a bit further with data from these research projects. This is an overview of the outcomes of a public opinion survey done with the European population using a network of polling agencies, where we asked citizens to identify a forest they feel specifically attached to, European households, and then ask them to rank from a scale from 0 to 100 the importance of different forest ecosystem services for them. And we asked them inter alia to make we grouped the data in relation to if they identified a rurally located forest or an urban forest to be most important for them. We don't have time now to go into details of that, but I would like to highlight the 2 ends of this scale. On the left side, you see aesthetics, air quality, habitat for plants and animals, and human health as the highly scored values in the perspective of European households. These were ecosystem services that were appreciated the most. And on the right side, you see fuel wood for timber and hunting as ecosystem service that the average citizen, so to say, in Europe scored the lowest. I would like to highlight that this is perception. So we didn't look, for instance, at economic statistics of wood consumption, which could have shown a quite different picture. On the other side, this is from a survey we conducted in the Cincian InnoForest project with great support by the European private forest owners and the state forest owners and municipal forest owner organization. we surveyed 1,707 European forest owners and managers and asked them to self-indicate the relatively contribution of different forest ecosystem services to their income from forestry. And if you compare it to the public perception on forest, the picture here is quite opposite if you want. Below you see provisioning forest ecosystem services, by far most important wood and timber, and on the right side in red cultural forest ecosystem services. Forest owners reported overwhelmingly that provisioning forest ecosystem services are the most important source of income from their management, while a large percentage, more than 80%, reported that cultural ecosystem services and also regulating contributed less than 20% to their income. We didn't differentiate the sources of income, so this also includes subsidies and contracts, for instance. So if you take that together, the public perception of forests highlighting very much aesthetics, highlighting nature on the one hand, and the possibilities currently for forest owners and managers to create income if they're interested in income, not all are, you see a certain challenge for forest policy making arriving. A second challenge I would like to introduce a bit more before I turn towards some solutions we try to develop or sketch out in the policy paper are two distinct perspectives on EU forest policy. Well, obviously, there are many different perspectives on EU forest policy, as there are many, many member states and many groups interested in forest. So this is simplifying a bit a policy debate we can observe already not since last year's, but already before the new, let's say, forest policy arrangement that we currently are discussing has arrived. These perspectives are different with regard to the view of forest, major policy goals for forests, what you may call resource management paradigms and main policy focus, and they are shared as a rule by different actors. Let's begin with a forestry and wood perspective. Here, the central perspective is that forest is a renewable natural resource. Bioeconomy, sustained timber use are major policy goals. Sustainable forest management is a resource paradigm discussed in that regard. The main policy focus is to support forest producers, to highlight market governance, market-based mechanisms, but also to give incentives for multiple forest ecosystem services provision. And as I said already, this is simplifying a complex reality as a trend within the European Commission DG Agriculture, but also forest-rich member states with an important, also socioeconomically important forest sectors, like the ones mentioned, forestry NGOs and forestry departments, highlight that perspective. On the other side, there is a perspective that you can label as nature conservation perspective. Forests are seen mostly as an ecosystem with irreplaceable biodiversity, or recently also as a carbon sink. The major policy goals are nature, conserve biodiversity. Here the concepts used are conservation concepts, and recently the debate on closer to nature forestry. Main policy focus is to protect forests, regulation is highlighted, but also incentives for multiple forest ecosystem services. And as a trend, this is the perspective DG Environment is advocating within the European Commission, and it's also prominent in the position of rather forest poor, but population-rich EU member states, environmental NGOs and departments. For the actors, please keep in mind that there's diversity within all these countries. There's always the difficulty if you try to simplify something that you a bit lose the complexity that you really have in the policy system. Still, these two perspectives are quite prominent and are partly quite polarized in the EU policy debate already since more than a decade. Now moving on towards solution, if my computer allows me to do this, sorry for that. I would like to sketch out very shortly 4 possible policy responses. The first one is better information. The main rationale is to provide more robust data and increase transparency on both forest ecosystem services provisioning, but also demand. The idea could be to develop an integrated European forest monitoring approach that provides really policy relevant information, looking at the targets and also looking at the conflicts we currently have in EU forest policies and the disagreements, and make it publicly available. It does not seem necessary to reinvent the wheels, but rather the idea could be to combine different available data sets, national forest inventories, remote sensing data at an aggregated scale, but also social science data. I would like to highlight this on the demand by society. What is actually demanded by the European public, which should be essential for forest policymakers at the EU and national levels. It is also about building trusts and resolving disagreement on data in a collaborative manner. The second response is highlighting policy integration. As I have shown with my two perspectives on EU forests, there is obviously different objectives and targets advanced by different sectoral policies and that are also more or less important in different EU member states. It seems crucial that there's an acknowledgement of that diversity and the importance of these objectives, and there's also a process started to seek an alignment of perspectives. This can be done by a process of what you can call horizontal policy integration, specifically also connecting ambitious targets to also financial instruments. I come back to that on my next slide. It can also needs to be done by a thorough assessment or a negotiation process of where policy coordination is mostly advanced at the EU level, at national levels, or even sub-national levels. So there is a dialogue needed on how to prioritize in the diversity of European regions and countries. I would like to specifically highlight the European Network Integrate I have been working with in the past, coordinated by the European or facilitated by European Forest Institute, where exactly this integration at the policy, but also science and forest management level was practiced for conservation and forest use objectives. A third response that has gained some prominence in the recent discussions is payment for ecosystem services. Develop a European PES system to align ecosystem services demand and supply and support also EU forest-related policy objectives by financial instruments to make sure that this is not disconnected. Financial flows via the CAP, policies via biodiversity and climate seems essential to address also economic conflicts related to forest management, specifically on private forest lands. To have such a system ambitiously in Europe could be a real option for future forest policy making. There's a need, of course, to prioritize key ecosystem services, but there's also a need, we heard this before, to give flexibility for national and local priority setting. It should also, and this is one of the lessons from these two projects, dared to try new approaches such as reverse auctions, as that was done in the Sincere project in Denmark with the Danish private forest owners, where they can bid for an offer, or where they can offer biodiversity, for instance, to the state that then looks for the most interesting offer and pays a private forest owner for biodiversity offering. Let's try to experiment there. And finally, a complementary response is bottom-up participation and innovation. This could, on public lands, mean to include, and I think this is again something to respecting the diversity of forest management situations across Europe. On public lands, this could mean to integrate citizens, to integrate local stakeholders in forest management planning and participatory forest management approaches. In all forests, this could mean to incentivize innovative business models that look into diversifying options to work with forest ecosystem service. As I said previously, we work with that in the different EU projects. There are a lot of interesting examples, but there's also a lot of, let's say, obstacles if you try to do something new in forestry, because the policy system is not used to that yet, also at the national and local levels. And finally, to facilitate also at these local levels, exchange and learning across different local contexts. That's it from my side. I hope you found it interesting. If you want to read more, here's the policy link to the policy paper. I would really like to thank the funders of the two EU projects that have been working together on that. And I would like to really warmly thank all the many European citizens, forest owners, policy stakeholders for being available and answering to our many, many questions in all the surveys I presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Georg. That was just a brilliant characterization of what's going on here. I could have listened to that for hours. I thought you really captured this the tensions, the graph on the table, the reality of the challenge, and then also gave us some helpful thoughts for solutions. So thank you so much for that. That was really clear. And just so that everybody knows, that's going to be available, that presentation, all the links will be available tomorrow on the website. So the next piece that we're going to have is a video from private forest owners. And this is a video expressing the messages to the EU developed and presented by CEPF and Copa Cogeca. So, and this is about 2.5 minutes long. So here's the video.
Com a propietària forestal, espero que la Unió Europea desenvolupi una bioeconomia forestal que ajudi a la conservació i a la supervivència dels boscos, fent-los resilients al canvi climàtic i també als incendis. Espero també que es promoguin compensacions econòmiques que afavoreixin i protegeixin els boscos, així com la seva biodiversitat. La gent que ens hi dediquem ho fem per ètica, responsabilitat social i fins i tot també per tradició. Som absolutament conscients que, a banda de proveir de matèries primes, la nostra labor té un altíssim valor per la societat. És per això que també demano a la Unió Europea que ens ajudi a dignificar la nostra feina.
Metsaomanikul ootan Euroopa Liidult, et annaks meile rohkem tegutsemisvabadust ja usaldaks meid. Üleliigne reguleerimine ei too meile seda oodatust. See tekitab meis hirmu ja segadust. Metsaomanik on tegelikult kõige parem loodushoidja, tema tunneb oma metsa ja talle tuleb anda õiged suunised.
Als Waldbesitzerin wünsche ich mir, dass ich unseren Wald, der sich seit Jahrhunderten im Familienbesitz befindet, auch weiter bewirtschaften kann. Wir nutzen den Wald einzelstammweise, also sehr nachhaltig. Es bietet Raum für die Biodiversität, es erhält seine Schutzfunktion und hilft auch dem Klima. Durch die Bewirtschaftung wird die Speicherkapazität des CO2 gewährleistet und wir können durch das Holz auch energieintensive Baustoffe ersetzen. Ich finde, wir Waldbesitzer leisten wichtige Dienstleistungen für die Allgemeinheit. Außer Nutzungsstellungen sehe ich sehr kritisch.
Thank you very much for that video. I'm hoping it came across a bit clearer to participants because it wasn't very clear from here, but hopefully that's just a problem at my end. Okay, so that's all the kind of presentations that we're going to have. We're now going to move into the panel discussion. So before we get into this, and while my panelists draw themselves together, and before I introduce them, I'd just like to remind participants about the Q&A function. So we have a good 25 minutes for, hopefully, for questions and answers at the end. And if you use the Q&A box to pop any questions that you might have in there, but please flag who the question is for. That would be great. And then we should have a really nice interactive session at the end of this panelist and response session. Okay, so could I invite my first panelist to switch their cameras on, please, as I introduce you. So we have Dr. Bernhard Wolfslehner, who is head of the governance programme at the European Forest Institute and is head of the EFI Forest Europe team. Hi, Bernhard. We have Gaëlle Marion, who is head of the B2 unit on environmental sustainability, DG Agri, European Commission. Hi, Gaëlle, it's good to have you here.
Hello.
Then we have Galena Woodhouse, who is project manager on Global Biodiversity Standard at BGCI, and she's here representing the IUCN Species Survival Commission, the Plant Conservation Committee, and the IUCN Global Tree Specialist Group. Wow, Galena, that's quite a list. So great to have your expertise here on the panel as well. Nice to see you. And then last but not least, Dr. Peter Mayer, who is Director of the Federal Research and Training Centre for Forests, Natural Hazards and Landscape, BFW. Welcome, Peter. You're very welcome to be here with us.
Good afternoon, Jo.
Thank you. Okay, so we're just going to kick things off by the same question going to all of you. And just so as you know what order we're going to do things in, I'm going to come to Peter Mayer first. So the opening question. Over the last 2 years, there have been many policy developments in the EU which impact on or are reliant on the management of forests, as we've been hearing this morning. In this policy landscape, where do you see the greatest threats and opportunities for sustainable forest management? And if you could keep your answers to 2 minutes each, please. So, Peter, would you like to go first? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So thanks very much for the opportunity. And of course, this question is very, very important. What are the threats and the opportunities? I think what we see and what has been analyzed by the previous speakers is that we're looking at a decentralized forest policy landscape when it comes to European Union policies. They are dealt with in many, many different policies. Nevertheless, one threat that can be observed is that some of these policies, and I would call them, are more single issue policies and do not fully take account of the complexity of forests and sustainable forest management, and do sometimes pose very narrow boundaries to their policy view. So that is a threat to not be able to meet the complexity. And it could also then lead to negative effects, for example, when you look at social sustainability or rural development, just to name a few, if you're not coping with all the different aspects of a holistic concept. Allow me to have a brief joke that I have used in some of my presentations, because I think it illustrates the threat or the misunderstanding. Forestry is not rocket science. It's much more complicated than that. And I think that is something that we need to bear in mind when we talk about the issue. It is complex and complicated, and therefore this joke has a lot of truth inside, and I would be happy if we remember that that really means we have to look at many, many different aspects when it comes to forests and forestry. And now 1 minute for opportunities. Maybe the most important opportunity is that the whole forest sector is a sector of the future. So everything we talk about is about renewable resources, is something that will be very important for shaping the society of the future. The circular bioeconomy is one concept that takes account of a new system of how we want to develop societies, and that goes as far as influencing consumer behavior. So, and if you look at the population dynamics in Europe, if you look at urbanization, so there are many important mega drivers where such a new concept for how we want to develop, where do we want to be a society in the future, is very important, and the whole forest sector plays a very important role in that. And the foresters and forest interested people need, of course, to be active and to be innovative to shape that future. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I now pose the same question to Galena Woodhouse, please.
Thank you. So IUCN, particularly the IUCN Species Survival Commission that I'm representing, has a strong focus on biodiversity conservation. And the IUCN program for the next quadrennium set out in our Nature 2030 publication notes that global initiatives such as the Bonn Challenge to restore 350 million hectares of degraded land by 2030 offers a unique opportunity to enhance biodiversity conservation whilst restoring degraded ecosystems. And some of the European policies are looking really strong from that perspective, particularly an example of opportunities if the forest-related targets of the 2030 EU biodiversity strategy are really taken on board particularly the focus on protecting all remaining primary and old growth forests and increasing the quality, diversity and resilience of the region's forests. That presents a fantastic opportunity. Secondly, the roadmap for planting 3 billion additional trees across Europe by 2030, and it aims to do this in full respect of ecological principles by planting the right tree in the right place for the right purpose. We're really pleased to see that the strategy references the 10 golden rules for reforestation, which the IUCN Species Survival Commission co-authored. So many countries within Europe have made pledges to the Bonn Challenge. And if they apply these rules from the 10 golden rules, as well as the application of ecological principles, and that's translated into national tree planting policies, there's a huge potential for biodiversity conservation and restoration. So just a quick moment to mention here the Global Biodiversity Standard as a new tool that will be available soon to assess the biodiversity impact of tree planting and other forest management interventions, which could help with monitoring if policy targets related to biodiversity are being met. Finally, a threat that we see a potential missed opportunity that the EU biodiversity strategy and tree planting roadmap is not being more ambitious when it comes to the diversity of native tree species that can be incorporated in the planting mix. There are 454 tree species native to Europe, of which 265 are found only in Europe. This varies a lot per country and site, but incorporating a minimum of 3 species, which the roadmap had mentioned, seems low. For the region as a whole, 42% of species were assessed as threatened, and 58% are threatened with extinction in the wild. By not considering these species in the planting mix or in broader SFM considerations, e.g. the protection of the sites that they occur, we're not ensuring that they do not become more threatened, and we miss an important opportunity to improve their conservation status. A quick mention here of the Global Tree Portal, which is a key piece of work produced by the IUCN SSC Global Tree Specialist Group, and it provides for the first time national tree species checklists and national lists of threatened tree species. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Galena. So now on to Gaëlle Marion.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be with you. And I will perhaps react shortly on the side of threats that were mentioned previously, and to say that I see, of course, on the side of the development of legislation, we indeed have a lot, and this has been mentioned previously. It's true that there is the new package Fit for 55. There is the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive included in that, the new taxonomy, the deforestation proposed regulation, the coming nature restoration law, and of course our forest monitoring law that will be in the making this year and at the beginning of next year. And I can see that all this legislative development can be a source of fear for some of us, but as I see precisely the forest strategy and its implementation, its actions, which will trigger a lot of exchanges, which will take some time, and I hope I will be able to come back on that. For me, is an opportunity to bring this all these things together and to discuss them and to make sure they come into a consistent framework. But in terms of opportunities, my key message in this first round was to speak about also the support that are brought by the EU policies. And I can speak best, of course, of the Common Agricultural Policy, since I belong to DG Agriculture. So under the Common Agricultural Policy, and especially the new policy, which will start to be implemented in 2023, that has been adopted at the end of last year, we have a lot of funding possibilities that are available for member states to program intervention support schemes for foresters or forest owners, for forest communities. The new framework is more flexible, will allow precisely national authorities to design support schemes taking into account not only their national circumstances, but also even their regional circumstances or even their local circumstances. It can be about supporting area-based management commitments for certain good practices which are expensive perhaps for forest owners. So some compensations can be available there. It can be about financing investments, for example, to fire prevention, but also supporting investments or innovation in small-size processing enterprises for the bioeconomy, and also things like training, knowledge exchange can be funded under the Common Agricultural Policy. So this clearly, for me, is an opportunity that should not be overlooked. And there are other EU policies which can also support the development of sustainable management of forest, be it from the regional policy, from LIFE or Horizon Europe, from other cooperation programs. And also there are some work fronts on the side of state aid, for example, which can also be very interesting to allow and promote, for example, or facilitate the support to payment for ecosystem services. That would be for the first round.
Thank you very much. And finally, from Dr. Wolfslehner, what's your thoughts on this, please?
Oh, thank you, Joe, for the floor. Yeah, since it's only 2 minutes, of course, it's a rather complex question. I will focus on one aspect, and this is the need for consistency in the EU forest policy landscape, as you called it, because basically this entails both aspects, so the threats and opportunities. So to be a bit blunt, it didn't just start 2 years ago, but we have now rural development, renewable energy, bioeconomy, climate change mitigation, biodiversity, restoration, just to flag a few keywords. You see, it's a long list. And it's a long list also in respect that these policy goals have been coming in a rather short time, and this particularly compared to the time frame that foresters are normally thinking in hundreds of years or decades. So in the end, we find a solution only also now when again there are new goals, new targets coming up that this might lead to a certain confusion or also uncertainty if goals are changing quickly or changing in priority. So because we're speaking now that almost every year, every second year, something changes in this forest policy framework. So I think that clarifying this will not work without looking at trade-offs among these objectives. So this is basically what can we do at the cost of another objective. Because if we forget about the trade-offs, this is likely to lead to segregation. So this is a separation of ecosystem service in forests, which is quite contrary to the multifunctional understanding of sustainable forest management in Europe, which has always been designed or understood as a balancing approach. So here we see a little bit the problem of also changing paradigms. This is not negative per se, but we have to go into this process with open eyes. And this is a completely different approach. And we also have to see that the tradition in a often small-scale forest landscape with more than 60 million forest owners in Europe, they of course, their skills are in this balancing approach. And I think in this respect, it is also important to connect policies with realities in order to implement them. So, and this leads me back to my main argument that this requires, among others, a very high level of consistency, because you also have to bring people on board that are living and managing their forests, that are owning forests, but also the public who has certain interests and demands. To end my first statement in a positive way, what we of course also have here is that forests are the largest natural land resource in Europe. And on the other hand, our dependence on raw materials from other parts of the world is getting painfully visible these days. So I think this is something we have to also face, that we can use this resource in different ways, of course. I think this has to be negotiated, but there's a lot of potential also to shape our future development and economy proactively here with our resources. I think this is important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And what a diverse range of thoughts coming there from our panelists. So I think this will be really rich discussion. So sharpen up your keyboards, get your questions in. Great, there's another one that's just come in there, so we'll get those ready for later. Okay, so thanks. Now that we've all heard about threats and opportunities, and you all took a very different angle on things there, so that was interesting to that question. I've now got some follow-up questions for you. And I'm going to mix up the order again here, just to keep you on your toes. So I'm going to Gaëlle Marion, I'm going to come to you first, please. So we've had a lot of talk today about the forest strategy. So could you, as the EC person, as the Commission person here, could you give us an update, please, on progress so far on the implementation of the forestry strategy? Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, I'm very happy to give a short state of play of where we are, and perhaps starting with a remark that in this forest strategy there are a lot of actions that will be implemented, and of course not all are being implemented at the same time. So there are some actions that have started, some that are nearly ended, and some which will start later. And I wanted to raise it especially because one of the topic, which is of course very important, is the development of new sustainable forest management indicators, and this is part of the actions that will start a bit later. So on this one, as of today, there is not much I can report on, but I'm happy, of course, to tell you more about what has started. I mentioned it already in my previous intervention that one of the action was about the promotion of support for forest under the Common Agricultural Policy, and at the moment we are assessing the draft CAP strategic plans that Member States submitted to us, which would start next year for their implementation until 2027. And on this we are working closely with Member States now, having regular bilateral meetings, and we are looking, of course, at the forest part of these CAP strategic plans, how well the needs have been assessed and reflected, how they propose to address these needs, and where we can, of course, we try to help to make sure the needs of forest can be well addressed under these CAP plans. So that's one thing which makes us quite busy at the moment. We are working on exchanges, advice, and technical guidance on the development of ecosystem service payment schemes. And this was mentioned by Mr. Georg Winkel, that these payment to ecosystem services are really important in the context of the sustainable development of forest. We have organized a workshop on the 31st of March, and now based on this workshop and with other inputs, we will develop what we will call a guidance document in the coming months, in order to gather different experiences and provide some source of information and inspiration to design ecosystem service payment schemes. Of course, and this was also mentioned, the additional 3 billion trees pledges is ongoing, has started. There are also the development of several guidelines that are going on to enable all primary and old-grown forests to be defined, mapped, and protected. This under the responsibility of DG Environment. Maybe I open a bracket. As you know, we are 3 DGs co-responsible for this strategy. It's not only DG Agri. I'm happy to speak today, but we are 3 DGs. I think you know well. So some activities are undertaken by DG Env or DG Climat or ourselves directly. For on the side of DG Environment, for example, the development of these guidelines, which also includes the closer to nature forestry practices or the biodiversity friendly afforestation and reforestation. So this is the package of guidance, which should be ready in the course of the year. And of course, and that's a key point, it's many activities related to the development of legislation. There is the preparation of the nature restoration law, which should come in the second semester of 2022, which will be important for forest. There is, of course, a continued discussion now in the Council and with the Parliament on the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive or the LULUCF, and these are very important files, as well as the deforestation. These also are very important part. But you see, the forest strategy and its implementation keeps these things together under a framework. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the development to come of a new forest monitoring and strategic planning framework law, and that will be developed in the course of this year and the beginning of next year, to be ready at the end of the second quarter 2023. At the moment, very soon, there will be the possibility to everyone to contribute on the Have Your Say webpage of the Commission to comment on this initiative. There will be still in spring the publication of call for evidence, launch of open public consultations, and the beginning of the in-depth impact assessments that should come prior to this initiative. So that's for the main ones, but I hope this will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. That's a great kind of overview of all the work that's already underway on that, and that's obviously just in one part of these things. So I'm sure there'll be some more questions on that will come through from the audience, and we'll come to that when we get to the Q&A. Okay, so next, Galena, I'd like to come to you, please, to speak a little bit about IUCN. And for you to give us a bit more of an international perspective. So how do you see the EU being positioned globally regarding forests and their management compared to other continents or parts of the world? And what are the thoughts of the IUCN on ongoing Commission work related to forest management, like guidelines on closer to nature, nature restoration, and what have you? I realise you covered a bit of this in the start, but maybe you could just develop that a bit to give us that international flavour from beyond the EU. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll start off with a bit of data from the Global Tree Assessment. So as I mentioned previously, Europe has just over 450 native tree species. If we compare that to the neotropics, so Central and Southern America, which has the world's highest tree diversity, they're looking at 23,500 tree species, and then followed by regions such as Indo-Malaya and the Afrotropics, which have from 13,500 species to 9,200 tree species. So in terms of what the species that Europe is working with, there is much less species diversity to consider when undertaking sustainable forest management interventions than perhaps in the tropics. So threats vary globally, as we know. Harvesting of wood for fuel and charcoal production is a huge problem across the African continent, and so becomes a key consideration within sustainable forest management policy and development. So according to the FAO, only 6% of EU forests are situated in protected areas. So if we contrast that to Southern America, where there is 31%. However, when we're looking at the management plans in place for forests within Europe, there is about 96% of forests with management plans in place, in contrast to about 20% in Southern America. So additionally to this, much of Europe's forests are within public ownership. And so accessibility to forests, community involvement, and opportunities for education are vast. I think it's important to note that the EU does contribute to global deforestation through importing and consuming commodities, as has been mentioned by a few other speakers so far. And so this embedded deforestation is something that, that is key to consider, especially in the global context. So IUCN looks forward to the EEC Nature Restoration Law and its legally binding targets on key ecosystems, including forests. And we expect any delay in its launch to be short as possible, and soon we will see this legislative proposal from the EC. From IUCN, we've been engaged on this particular topic since the release of the EU Biodiversity Strategy, and we're ready to support its swift implementation. We want to also reiterate the importance noted in the IUCN Nature 2030 publication, that we need to harness the unique opportunity presented by the Bonn Challenge, which I mentioned previously, and other restoration pledges to enhance biodiversity conservation while restoring degraded ecosystems and planting native species, focusing on those that are threatened nationally or globally. And included in this some interesting areas of work, the Global Tree Portal, as I mentioned, the Global Tree Assessment, and the Global Biodiversity Standard, as well as other resources in terms of the Plant Centennial Network and the Genetic Resources Strategy for Europe. So there's incredible resources that are out there to help support this. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Galena. That's great. And that perspective on only 10% protected in EU, but 96% with management plans, the 415 species versus 1,000 in the tropics. I think that's really useful in just getting our heads out of our bubble a little bit and putting some global perspective. That's excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to come to Bernhard Wolfslehner next. And the question for you, which is about Forest Europe, which you obviously have a role in. So what do you think should be done to improve the coordination between the work of Forest Europe on SFM and its associated tools and the work of the EU and its member states on the same topic?
Thank you, Joe. So I think it's basically talking about a very fundamental issue here, also on the relationship between the Forest Europe process and the countries and the EU, which is, of course, a bit complex. But first, let me note that Forest Europe has been designed as an instrument for the coordination per se. So this also is related to the structure of the process. It's an informal process that is driven by its signatories and involves a variety of observers. So the interesting thing is, of course, that all EU member states are signatories, even the EU is a signatory. And then, of course, the second beauty is that we have a pan-European scope, which means that we also have our neighboring countries and regions on board. So I think this gives another dimension also when we think about forest trade, about forest cooperation. So I think this is important to note as a starting point. As such, Forest Europe has made a lot of progress over the past 30 years. So this relates both to tangible products, like we all know the criterion indicators, the State of Europe's Forests reports, and different management guidelines. But equally important are also the procedural successes, means finding a common language on forests. So this was not natural some 30 years ago, finding common definitions, which also helped harmonizing monitoring, creating an informal policy forum and respective networks that can talk to each other in an informal setting, which is sometimes also important, also compared to this very formal exchange modalities. And all this complies with international activities on SFM. So this is equally important that we understand that this SFM has become a sort of key reference for the member states and also forest owners in Europe, even if the political debate has now shifted a bit. So this means from Forest Europe side, we understand that there is a natural substrate for coordination because we often have the same participants, the same similar players in the meetings, also compared to people participating on EU level. And as I said, the coordination is also needed to safeguard a strong position of Europe and the EU in the international arena. So just think about the upcoming UNFF meeting in New York. So I think this is also an important aspect not to forget about. We also have to see that many activities under Forest Europe are conducted by member states. So think of the forest monitoring. So I think it's important not to divide where there are common objectives. And very often we have common objectives, but maybe different approaches to work on it. I think it's of utter importance to create synergies in the common work on forests and avoid redundancies. That's a message that we very often receive. For example, in the future work on indicators for SFM, I see a strong chance and need to closely work together. And the same is true also for future monitoring approaches, where all relevant experts and data providers should be involved, and EU and Forest Europe can work together. I think this requires openness and transparency in activities and active involvement in respecting working groups, so that we really sort of also invite EU invites Forest Europe and vice versa to really be on the same page. I think this is something we also hear very often from our member states, our signatories, that this is important, because a case unwanted would be to have parallel monitoring schemes, double efforts for member states, double reporting, and finally adverse messages on forests to the broader public, and not at least giving ambiguous guidance to the actors along the value chain. And we talk about forest owners, the industries, and the stakeholders working on a variety of ecosystem services and societal demands on forests. So I think this alone tells us about the complexity, but also the need to work together, because otherwise it would be really frustrating if efforts are doubled. Sustainable forest management is a well-established concept that has provided stability in the political discourse on forests in the past decades. But it's also a dynamic concept, as we claim, and this dynamic in these days of rapid changes, of high uncertainties, is more needed than ever. And I think it needs a constructive cooperation between the EU and Forest Europe. And to give a few examples, what could be feasible is the newly created Forest Europe SFM think tank. So this started in April, which provides an informal forum to discuss the future of SFM in Europe, because it's really so we have to always revisit what we are doing, and not everything is carved in stone. So we need this flexibility, but we also need a forum to think, and that this is exactly where we also invite our signatories and observers, and with this, of course, also the EU to actively participate. So another example that is also will be a brand new thing is the Forest Europe High-Level Policy Dialogue, which will have a first ministerial segment in August 30 this year. So this is a new activity that aims at bringing together the ministers of the Forest Europe process and other policymakers together more frequently, because it was very often the case that ministers just meet every 4 or 5 years, and we thought in these days this might be an approach. So we will have the first test run, as I said, in August. This will be hosted by Minister Özdemir, the Minister for Agriculture in Germany. So this shall serve the purpose of rapid political response on emerging forest issues. And we have had plenty of them in recent time where we observed, okay, no quick reaction possible. And I think developing ways how to address these emerging issues timely, this should be of common interest to the EU and Forest Europe. Another example is that we're currently working also to develop a forest risk mechanism to better deal with forest risk, also a great opportunity where coordination and cooperation could be really beneficial. So as a summary, so explore synergies, strengthen political and technical cooperation, and commit to transparent exchange and coordination. This will be the key factors for the time to come, and I'm confident that we will find our ways and fora to do so. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bernhard. And speaking from Scotland, we're very pleased to be able to still be part of Forest Europe, whilst we might be reluctantly outside of the EU. So my former colleagues are great enthusiasts for Forest Europe. It's a great forum. Okay, thank you. I shall get off that soapbox now. And finally, Dr. Meyer, I'm going to come to you. So the question we have for you, and this is quite a long one, so please bear with me. So in a world beyond policy, we all recognise, and we've heard a lot this morning actually, about the importance of clear objectives and efficient governance systems, driving action on the ground, and good indicators to keep us on track. So we currently have indicators defined at pan-European and national levels, as well as national and regional rules and legislation applying to forest management. So it's layer upon layer. What are your reflections on the need for additional EU regulatory provisions related to forest management to achieve the overall policy objectives of the EU Green Deal for Future Fit EU 2050? Okay, so sorry, that was a very long question, but basically saying we've already got all of these layers. Could you just unpack for us the values and the need for an additional EU regulatory provisions? Your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. An easy question. I'll provide you with an easy answer, I guess. No, thank you very much. No, allow me just to give a few thoughts and highlights on that. I mean, we've been talking about different policies, for example, the Green Deal or Fit for 55 and so on. And when you look into these policies, you see that they have their own view on some things. The Green Deal, of course, is an overarching policy that highlights many aspects. But for example, circular bioeconomy is one of the elements that is highlighted there, but many other things as well. But for example, interestingly, it fails to address the full potential of the forest value chain. Although the forest value chain provides 2 to 3 million jobs in the European Union, more than other sectors that are highlighted as being relevant for the future, like electronics, textiles, plastics, and so on. So I think we need to revisit some of these policies and to see where are the gaps. And one thing I would like to say, we always should, when we talk about forests, we should talk about people. It's about us. It's about society. So it's very important not just to look at the natural science side of it, but also to understand that it's about livelihoods, it's about social issues and so on. Similarly, I mean, the Fit for 55 package looks very much on carbon storage. This is, of course, understandable, but on the other hand, it misses the full complexity that I have mentioned before on when you talk about forests and forest management. And of course, biodiversity is very important because Galena has highlighted many of the important aspects here, but we also have to understand that there are also trade-offs, as Bernhard has mentioned, between civil things and also the Europe global aspect that Galena has mentioned, I think is very important. There is a study by the Thünen Institute that highlights very much if we stop using forests in Europe, this will have a lot of negative consequences globally and in countries where you have lower standards, where you have democratic principles in states that we may not like to support and so on. So again, it's about trade-offs and it's about understanding the whole picture. And I think that's my plea for the future to be able to get into that. So solutions. I think it's important to understand times, frames, and systems. I mean, this is a little abstract, but it's different if you only look at the carbon balance today or if you look for 100 years. And I think some of the difficulties we have in understanding each other is that we portray different realities and futures. And I think it is important to always understand what are we talking about, in which time frames, and also in which systems. If we only look at the forest sector, that is not enough. And sometimes there's a tendency in some policies to just look at that as a closed system, but it is not a closed system. It's always connected to other sectors. I think substitution was mentioned already. So the effect of substitution goes way beyond what forests and wood is doing. It deals with industry developments, it deals with how we use non-renewable resources and so on. So again, so a plea, we have to understand the time and the systems we are talking about. Second, I have 4 points. Second point is, and that was mentioned by Bernhard very eloquently already, don't duplicate existing knowledge. So I will not dwell on Forest Europe, so I fully agree to everything that was said about that and the importance the criterion indicators have developed already in a very long and transparent and participatory process. So I think one has to understand that is, again, the complexity I've mentioned before with the rocket. It is complex. ENFIN network. This is a network about forest monitoring in Europe. European countries are talking about how to monitor forests and trees for many, many years. So I think one should use these resources and not build new systems and waste resources, to be very blunt now. For the forest sector, it means be active, be confident. There are solutions. Forests and trees are part of the solution. They're not the problem. And I think we have to portray that and make that also visible. And last but not least, and again, that draws a little bit also on what Georg has said, Georg Winkli and also Bernhard, on these questions of new forms of governance. So of how do we talk to each other? I think we might need to be innovative to leave our silos and our conventional way of thinking, talk to each other and try to find the common goals and common ground. My belief is there's much more there than it seems sometimes when you listen to different policies and representatives that are very deeply working in these policies. And then you could maximize the synergies. There might be target conflicts that there exist anyway. So if you look at all the policies now, they're full of target conflicts. You're not able to fulfill all these policies at one piece of forest at the same time. So a plea for an innovative approach, new platforms, new ways of governance to find a very constructive way ahead for a society of the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. After 35 years in forestry, I'm still trying to find the boundaries of the system. So trying to find the edges of forestry, it just goes everywhere and continues to, particularly with the bioeconomy stuff. So I absolutely, this being clear about what the system is, whether that's ecological or socioeconomic, yeah, it's a challenge. It doesn't start and finish with the forest. Okay, so thank you very much for all of our panelists. That was a really rich number of presentations. I would just like to encourage a few more questions. We've got a few that have lined up in the Q&A, so ask people to continue with bringing the questions in. And I'm now going to ask for some reactions to, in a minute, for some reactions to that conversation. I'll just do a very, very quick recap. I couldn't hope to recap it, but just so that my next group of panelists can gather their thoughts. So just sort of some of the key points that came out for me. We first heard from Gael, who was talking about the implementation of the forest strategy, and that work has started on the SFM, but that will come later. A big focus on support for forestry within the CAP, and this point about ecosystem service payment schemes. And been lots of work on that, you know, from my perspective. I see it going on in England as well in particular. Really interesting to see what the Commission can come up with on that. And this really important development of the Forest Monitoring and Strategic Framework Law, and the need for us all to have our say on that on the website. And I think that links back to all of the conversations on Forest Europe. Then we heard from Galena, who gave us some international context and the sort of the contrasts and comparisons between what's happening in Europe and more widely. Great enthusiasm for the links to the Bonn Accord and what have you. So and also recognizing that the impact of consumption abroad from the EU, as well as the management of our own states, and those are really, obviously we talk about it a lot in carbon terms, but particularly important in biodiversity terms as well, and socioeconomic. Then we heard from Bernard from Forest Europe, and really just laying out, I'm not a neutral moderator here, the value of Forest Europe. So please, 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 yes, let's not duplicate Forest Europe. It's there. It's been working away for years. So sorry, I shall stop that now. Okay, and then finally we heard from Peter, who talked about some of the gaps that we need to look at. This importance, so important and vital in forestry, of timeframes and systems, holding those in your head whenever you talk about forestry. This important of trade-offs that a number of other panelists have talked about. It's trade-offs and being realistic about those rather than silo thinking. Don't duplicate, and how we talk to each other. Absolutely. This is just wherever you look in forestry, how we talk across those boundaries is really vital, and the language we use and the value systems that we assume are so important there. Okay, so if anybody wasn't paying attention, that was a quick canter round what our panelists said. So I'm now going to invite three politicians to switch their cameras on and join us to get their reactions to all of that. And while they're switching on, I shall just introduce them. And I will apologise in advance if I don't quite get the pronunciations right. So first of all, we have Juan Calabuig Rull, who is the rapporteur for the opinion on the EU Forest Strategy for 2030 from the Committee of the Regions. You're welcome, Juan. I hope you are here.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you very clearly. We can't see you, but I can hear you very clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this very, very interesting meeting. As you say, I'm the rapporteur of the EU Forest Strategy 2030, an opinion who will be adopted tomorrow in the Committee of Regions plenary session. And of course, the first thing I must to say is that as Dr. Winkel says before, this question is we have a very political polarization, maybe more than I expected in the beginning. But what I must to say is that, as you know, 40% of the forest belong to public authorities, and of course, regions and cities have to say a lot in the management of this and this forest. And in the end, these regions and cities will be the ones implementing the regulations adopted at the European and national level. Okay, and what we are trying, because we think is especially important, is to have the maximum consensus, and it's not easy, I tell you, in the European Committee of Regions. For many of our members, the Commission's proposal is a little bit unbalanced, and others think that it's necessary to consider more the interest of the communities living in the forest and by the forest. Okay. Second question is that the European forests are diverse, and the realities are very, very diverse. Of course, we need maybe a vision of the European level, but we cannot have a single vision because the diversity is enormous. For example, when you talk about deforestation, I can tell you, for example, in my country, in the past 30 years, we have more than 30% more the forests in the not less forest, but 30% more forest in our country. But many times the problem is that the people is leaving these forest areas, and we have other kind of problems. For example, the fire, the big fires every day. Every day it's more and more important, this problem of fire. Okay, and in addition of this, of course, what we think also is that it's necessary to have a more consensus between the stakeholders, but not only stakeholders, all the stakeholders, NGOs, businesses, but also inhabitants or owners of these forest areas. Of course, the biodiversity is absolutely essential. But another thing, what is necessary.
I'm sorry, you're really breaking up here. Thank you. We've got your video on, but I think it was actually better when your video was turned off. Could you maybe just turn your video off again? I'm so sorry, but the link isn't very good.
You prefer I eliminate the video?
It's just that we're not hearing you very clearly. So I'm sorry. I
Well,
think
okay.
it's maybe your link.
Oh. So now it's better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In any case, what we want to say is that this, as I tell you, the biodiversity is essential, but it's also necessary to create quality jobs and renew our rural areas. Okay.
Thank you.
It's necessary to have these three elements: environmental, economic, and social. Okay, this is clear. And as Gaëlle Marion say, it's necessary not only in the common agriculture policy, but in other funds to increase the funds for the management of the forest. Okay, this is what I want to say, and again, thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry about the technical troubles there. Okay, so I'd like to come to our next reaction to what they've heard, and I'd like to invite Simo Tiainen, who is rapporteur for the opinion on the new EU forest strategy from EESC.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
So, honorable MEPs and dear organizations, dear friends, thank you very much for inviting me to this timely and important debate. My name is Simo Tiainen. I'm a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. The Economic Social Committee is a consultative EU body consisting representatives of employers, trade unionists, and many kind of civil society organizations. My own background is from the organization representing farmers and forest owners, rural entrepreneurs, as well from Finland, the Central Union of Agriculture Producers and Forest Owners. I had a pleasure to act as a rapporteur of the EESC opinion on this new EU forest strategy for 2030. So our opinion, we started to work last September, and we organized hearing, and I met personally or online many stakeholders, and we had study group meetings, and it was approved by the section, and finally the opinion was approved by the vast majority on December. So the main points for our opinion on the forest strategy is that it is very correct that the forest play a multifaceted role and have a significant economic, social, and environmental potential. So we note that the forest strategy addresses economic and social opportunities, but the Commission could have done that much more comprehensive way to address the economic and social potential of forests. So for instance, that 60% of the EU forests are privately owned property, and for owners, it's very often an economical activity, and it brings jobs and opportunities and livelihood for the rural areas. So in our opinion, it could have been more balanced way of taking into account the different dimensions of the sustainability, particularly this economic one. As we have heard today in a previous papers saying that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions. So we also highlight that forests are so different in different parts of the Europe, so that it is very important that EU makes decisions at the right level in accordance of competencies and principle of subsidiarity. So EU level framework, it's necessary when it in respect issues relating to the single market or the climate environment things, but it is very clear that the decisions on the forest management should be done in the national level, not at the EU level. In our opinion, we have a sentence that we are calling coherence, certainty, stability, clarity, and consistency in the policy and regulatory framework. It is crucial not to introduce initiatives that overlap or contradict with existing widely adopted sustainable definitions, principles, criteria, indicators, guidelines, and schemes. So this is important. We don't like as a practice. What we mean with this, that we don't like ideas what is there in the opinion to have a new types of closer to nature certificate, for instance. So this is the meaning of what I just said. In our opinion, we highlight the importance of the protection of property and free enterprises. So these are the principles that need to be upheld. One important thing to mention here is also that we are asking Commission to provide a comprehensive impact assessment of the forest strategy, or the impact assessment of the strategy to identify the implications for market conditions, rural areas, and other aspects. So now the case is that Commission is coming up with the impact assessment only by piece when they are proposing some legislation. But the idea is that we should have a more comprehensive way of having more comprehensive impact assessment, but what are on our table now, what they will mean to the sector or to Europe. So we welcome, or we highlight the importance to make more emphasis to adaptation to climate change. This is of course clear. So we are saying as also all EES opinions that the stakeholders, so the employers and workers and the other civil society organizations, should be involved when this initiative or legislative initiatives work is going on. We say that digital and green transition of forest-based activities require new skills. It's important to create quality jobs and to provide workers with opportunities and adequate working conditions of the wood-based bioeconomy. And perhaps final point, what I will say here is in our opinion is that we are calling EU to actively promote a level playing field for EU enterprises competing in international bioeconomy markets, and to enhance the global implementation of international agreements that contribute to protection and sustainable use of forests. So I'll stop here. I'll thank very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Sorry, I did the mute thing. Thank you so much. That was great. So we're now moving on to our last intervention, and it's last but absolutely by no means least, because I'm very pleased to introduce Tomáš Krejza, who's the Director at the Department of Forest Policy and Economics at the Ministry of Agriculture in the Czech Republic. But more importantly, he is going to be taking over from Isabel Millier, with the Czech presidency taking over the chair of the Forestry Working Party. So really interested to hear your reflections, given what's ahead of you, Tomáš, any reflections that you have on what you've heard today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo. I think today's meeting is very inspiring for me. And I have quite a simple task, because I don't need to repeat everything what Isabel already introduced, and that is the position of the Council on EU forest strategy, which has been expressed by Council conclusions. So my task would be rather to introduce you to some plans for future, and how we want to contribute to the implementation of the EU forest strategy, for example. And here I just dare to repeat that Council was not very happy about the way how the EU forest strategy was created without substantial contribution of member states, because in past we were used to cooperate very closely within the Standing Forestry Committee, and it was not the case this time. But still, we look very positive into the future and want to cooperate with European Commission in implementing the EU forest strategy. And I see that in past always EU member states-led initiatives were very important. One example was mentioned even today, that was European Network Integrate, which focuses on integration of nature protection into sustainable forest management. And in this particular case, it was initiated by member states, supported by European Commission, and it was collective work which can continue. So such a kind of activities, I think, would be very welcome to also in the future. And with a view to our presidency, for example, one priority for us would be a discussion on legislative proposal for forest observation, reporting, and data collection framework. It's going to be very important for us, and that is why we suggest to organize a workshop in the Czech Republic during our presidency. You know, for the presidency, it's always quite difficult because our agenda is not so closely linked to the implementation of the EU forest strategy. But we would like to contribute by organizing some events, informal events here in our country. And so I can announce here that we would like to organize a workshop from 14th to 16th September in the city of Kutná Hora, which is about 70 kilometers from Prague. And it should focus on the questions of forest monitoring, forest observation, and with a view to the new legislative proposal foreseen by the European Commission. That's one particular contribution to EU forest strategy implementation. Then what is quite burning issue is the future of a platform for discussing forest-related issue at the level of EU, especially at the level of European Commission. And in past, it was the task of Standing Forestry Committee, but there is some doubts now about that. Commission have also some plans to create some unique, unified platform for those discussions, including all kinds of stakeholders, etc. But we still prefer to develop that platform on the basis of Standing Forestry Committee. We have now some opinion from Council Legal Service about how we could deal with the Council decision on which the Standing Forestry Committee, on which basis it was founded in the past. So our plan is also to open that question within the Working Party on Forestry, and to discuss the future of the Standing Forestry Committee and how to adjust that very good tool to new conditions, new demands, how to involve, let's say, not only member states but also observers, and how to create one single platform for discussing forest-related issues. From the point of presidency, it's getting very complicated at the moment because there is a lot of legislative proposals, a lot of initiatives, but I must say that they are to be dealt by different bodies and different working groups and even different formations of the council. So, for example, the monitoring issue is likely to be discussed at the ENVI formation, or deforestation file is in fact dealt by ENVI formation, just with some contribution by agri-fish formation. So from the point of presidency, it's getting very complicated and very demanding for cooperation, coordination, not only at the national level but also at the EU level. And that's a new aspect of all the presidency business for us. Maybe one personal comment on the big issue of payments of ecosystems for ecosystem services. That's something we look at the national level, and in our forest policy we have a goal, a task, to create such a system of payments for forest ecosystem services until 2026. We started with some pilot subsidies or pilot programs, but we would like to transform them gradually into a very comprehensive system of payments. So we are very interested in that. Just one personal remark. In my opinion, it's going to be, or it should be just part of financing of forestry sector. We should not lose the ability of forest sector to finance itself, to be economically viable and independent on public funding. So I think it's a very important aspect as well. So thank you very much for inviting me to say something today, and it was very inspiring for our upcoming presidency. I'm sure we can build on all the information we learned today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our speakers today. You've all really grasped this very tricky topic. And we've now got just a quick Q&A session to fire at you all. So maybe whoever's going to answer the question can turn on their camera as they answer. The first one that I've got in, because I've had some on WhatsApp as well as in the sidebar. So my first question I would like to put to Ms. Marion, please. And sorry, I should just find it on my phone. Apologies. Right, okay, so we've heard an awful lot today about not duplicating, not cutting across work that's already been going on. Multiple speakers have spoken about that. How will the Commission ensure that existing national tools and expertise regarding SFM will be safeguarded when implementing the EU strategy and other related legislation?
Yes, I suppose there is certainly no intention to create bodies that would create confusion or any competition with existing bodies. The spirit in which we want to work to implement the forest strategy is, of course, to develop work based on existing knowledge, to use the groups that are already effective and producing expertise and knowledge, and of course to use all the resources that are out there. The idea behind the new governance that is proposed in this strategy is really to make for example, the Standing Forest Committee just a bit more inclusive, but it's not a revolution. It will continue to be an instance where member states representatives are represented and have their say on different Commission initiatives that are relevant for forest, that have an impact on forest. So it's really just to continue collaboration, but with this idea to be more inclusive, to update, for example, the task in view to make reference to now new policy objectives or initiative. But it's clearly to continue to work cooperatively with the expertise that exists already out there in the different organizations in different member states and the different bodies in the member states, as cooperatively as possible. And as I was saying, I think the implementation now of the strategy will have a time frame that will allow us to have more consultation steps and more dialogue, more exchanges, and some exchanges are even part, namely, of the actions in this strategy. And we, DG Agri, are responsible for some of these actions.
Thank you. Hopefully you've heard the message loud and clear from the people on the panel today. And one, I'm very sorry, bad moderator, our time has gone a bit up, so I'm going to ask the shortest question that's come up in the Q&A. And I would like somebody to volunteer to answer it quickly. So could policy responses be considered different for public and privately owned forests? Would somebody anybody from either of the panels, would somebody like to answer that question? Could policy responses be considered differently for public and privately owned forests? Any thoughts on that? Yes.
No, I can say something from the
Actually, sorry, Gail, just because you
yes,
I see Mr. Tiainen has come in. Yes, please go, Simon.
Well, thank you for such a question. My answer is that of course it's the forest is a private property for those who owns, and when it's the public owned, it's the public property, and of course the, let's say, decision making and the strategy could be different when it comes to the private and public forests. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that brief answer. Apologies to all. We were hearing so many interesting things that we didn't get through to all of the Q&A. So, but thank you so much for that. And I'm going to pass now to MEP Simone Schmidbauer, who's another co-host today, for some closing remarks from today. So, Simone, if you're able to turn your camera on, I shall pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. and good afternoon to all of you, also from my side. I think the discussion today was on purpose horizontal and not focused on a specific EU policy. The reason is that sustainable forest management is addressed in many ongoing EU policies, and that this horizontal, this holistic approach is unfortunately missing in the negotiations we are having today. The keynote speech and the panel discussion have shown that when considering forests and their management in policies, it is essential to have a big picture, to work together, to stay together. So in addition, ensuring coherence and synergies among policies, building trust, and using the knowledge and expertise of European forest owners and managers is so important. The event has also allowed to raise the position of member states, European regions, and representatives of economic and social parties regarding the new EU forest strategy. It is a fact that the several important pending questions and concerns expressed by these actors, their opinions are often convergent and in line with the views from those who own and who manage forests. So we all hope that the Commission will consider these inputs seriously in the steps for implementing this important EU strategy. Today's event has also shown that when it comes to sustainable forest management, there is a crucial need to build on existing work, initiatives and processes to work in a complementary way. This is the case when it comes to certification, to thresholds and indicators, and the ongoing work of Forest Europe. All inputs from today will certainly feed the ongoing Parliament's work to frame its position on the new EU forest strategy and other forest-related policies, such as RED III, LULUCF, or the regulation on halting deforestation, and so on. So thank you all for your valuable contribution. Let us work together. I wish you all a really nice afternoon, and also thanks to Peter, the rocket man of this afternoon. I think we will never forget your joke. So thanks a lot. Best regards to all.
Thanks very much, everyone, and have a good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.